technology to bypass the supposedly infallible gods. Was it possible to somehow bypass the humans altogether? The infallible technology. Holy books, like the Bible and the Quran, are a technology to bypass human fallibility, and religions of the book, like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, have been built around that technological artifact. To appreciate how this technology is meant to work, we should begin by explaining what a book is and what makes books different from other kinds of written texts. A book is priests, prophets, oracles, and other human messengers. Religious movements like Judaism began arguing that the gods speak through this novel technology of the book. There is one specific book whose many chapters allegedly contain all the divine words about everything from the creation of the universe to food regulations. Crucially, no priest, prophet, or human institution can forget or change these divine words, because you can always compare what the fallible humans are telling you with what the infallible book records. But religions of the book have their own set of problems. Most obviously, who decides what to include in the holy book? The first copy didn't come down from heaven. It had to be compiled by humans. Still, the faithful hoped that this thorny problem could be solved by a once-and-for-all supreme effort. If we could get together the wisest and most trustworthy humans, and they could all agree on the contents of the holy book, from that moment onward, we could excise humans from the loop, and the divine words would forever be safe from human interference. Many objections can be raised against this procedure. Who selects the wisest humans? On the basis of what criteria? What if they cannot reach a consensus? What if they later change their minds? Nevertheless, this was the procedure used to compile holy books like the Hebrew Bible. The making of the Hebrew Bible. During the first millennium BCE, Jewish prophets, priests, and scholars produced an extensive collection of stories, documents, prophecies, poems, prayers, and chronicles. The Bible, as a single holy book, didn't exist in biblical times. King David and the prophet Isaiah never saw a copy of the Bible. It is sometimes claimed, erroneously, that the oldest surviving copy of the Bible comes from the Dead Sea Scrolls. These scrolls are a collection of about 900 different documents, written mostly in the last 2 centuries BCE, and found in various caves around Qumran, a village near the Dead Sea. Most scholars believe they constitute the archive of a Jewish sect that lived nearby. Significantly, none of the scrolls contains a copy of the Bible, and no scroll indicates that the 24 books of the Old Testament were considered a single and complete database. Some of the scrolls certainly record texts that are today part of the canonical Bible. For example, 19 scrolls and fragmentary manuscripts preserve parts of the book of Genesis. But many scrolls record texts that were later excluded from the Bible. For example, more than 20 scrolls and fragments preserve parts of the book of Enoch, a book allegedly written by the patriarch Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, and containing the history of the angels and demons, as well as a prophecy about the coming of the Messiah. The Jews of Qumran apparently gave great importance to both Genesis and Enoch, and did not think that Genesis was canonical while Enoch was apocryphal. Indeed, to this day, some Ethiopian Jewish and Christian sects consider Enoch part of their canon. Even the scrolls that record future canonical texts sometimes differ from the present-day canonical version. For example, the canonical text of Deuteronomy 32:8 says that God divided the nations of the earth according to the number of the sons of Israel. The version recorded in the Dead Sea Scrolls has the number of the sons of God instead, implying a rather startling notion that God has multiple sons. In Deuteronomy 8:6, the canonical text requires the faithful to fear God, whereas the Dead Sea version asks them to love God. Some variations are much more substantial than just a single word here or there. The Psalms scrolls contain several entire psalms that are missing from the canonical Bible, most notably Psalms 151, 154, 155. Similarly, the oldest translation of the Bible, the Greek Septuagint, completed between the 3rd and the 1st centuries BCE, is different in many ways from the later canonical version. It includes, for example, the books of Tobit, Judith, Sirach, Maccabees, the Wisdom of Solomon, the Psalms of Solomon, and Psalm 151. It also has longer versions of Daniel and Esther. Its book of Jeremiah is 15% shorter than the canonical version. Finally, in Deuteronomy 32:8, most Septuagint manuscripts have either sons of God or angels of God, rather than sons of Israel. It took centuries of hair-splitting debates among learned Jewish sages, known as rabbis, to streamline the canonical database and to decide which of the many texts in circulation would get into the Bible as the official word of Jehovah and which would be excluded. By the time of Jesus, agreement was probably reached on most of the texts, but even a century later, rabbis were still arguing whether the Song of Songs should be part of the canon or not. Some rabbis condemned that text as secular love poetry, while Rabbi Akiva, died 135 CE, defended it as the divinely inspired creation of King Solomon. Akiva famously said that the Song of Songs is the Holy of Holies. By the end of the 2nd century CE, widespread consensus was apparently reached among Jewish rabbis about which texts were part of the biblical canon and which were not. But debates about this matter, and about the precise wordings, spelling, and pronunciation of each text, were not finally resolved until the Masoretic era, 7th to 10th centuries CE. This process of canonization decided that Genesis was the word of Jehovah, but the Book of Enoch, the life of Adam and Eve, and the Testament of Abraham were human fabrications. The Psalms of King David were canonized, minus Psalms 151 to 55, but the Psalms of King Solomon were not. The Book of Malachi got the seal of approval, the Book of Baruch did not. Chronicles, yes. Maccabees, no. Interestingly, some books mentioned in the Bible itself failed to get into the canon. For example, the books of Joshua and Samuel both refer to a very ancient sacred text known as the Book of Jasher, Joshua 10:13, 2 Samuel 1:18. The Book of Numbers refers to the Book of the Wars of the Lord, Numbers 21:14. And when 2 Chronicles surveys the reign of King Solomon, it concludes by saying that the rests of the Acts of Solomon, first and last, are written in the Chronicles of Nathan the prophet, and in the prophecy of Ahijah the Shilonite, and in the visions of Iddo the seer. 2 Chronicles 9:29. The books of Iddo, Ahijah, and Nathan, as well as the books of Jasher and the Wars of the Lord, aren't in the canonical Bible. Apparently, they were not excluded on purpose, they just got lost. After the canon was sealed, most Jews gradually forgot the role of human institutions in the messy process of compiling the Bible. Jewish orthodoxy maintained that God personally handed down to Moses at Mount Sinai the entire first part of the Bible, the Torah. Many rabbis further argued that God created the Torah at the very dawn of time, so that even biblical characters who lived before Moses, like Noah and Adam, read and studied it. The other parts of the Bible also came to be seen as a divinely created or divinely inspired text, totally different from ordinary human compilations. Once the Holy Book was sealed, it was hoped that Jews now had direct access to Jehovah's exact words, which no fallible human or corrupt institution could erase or alter. Anticipating the blockchain idea by 2,000 years, Jews began making numerous copies of the Holy Code, and every Jewish community was supposed to have at least one in its synagogue or its Beit Midrash, house of study. This was meant to achieve two things. First, disseminating many copies of the Holy Book promised to democratize religion and place strict limits on the power of would-be human autocrats. Whereas the archives of Egyptian pharaohs and Assyrian kings empowered the unfathomable kingly bureaucracy at the expense of the masses, the Jewish Holy Book seemed to give power to the masses, who could now hold even the most brazen leader accountable to God's laws. Second, and more important, having numerous copies of the same book prevented any meddling with the text. If there were thousands of identical copies in numerous locations, any attempt to change even a single letter in the Holy